big part of the interview is this connection with the interviewer, especially at Stanford.
What I always think about with the Stanford application overall, it is very much on brand and aligned with Stanford in terms of being an introspective place, thinking about the big picture, not being afraid to be very aspirational. Today on the mbaMission podcast, we're diving into one of the most distinctive and often most mysterious parts of the MBA journey, the interview. Specifically, the Stanford GSB interview. Stanford's approach is unlike that of most business schools, and understanding what they value, how they evaluate candidates, and what the experience really feels like can make a world of difference. To help unpack it all, I'm joined by two experienced mbaMission consultants, Julianne and Christine. Both have expertly guided GSB applicants through the process, and both know firsthand how Stanford's unique behavioral interview style reveals what truly matters to the admissions committee. In this episode, we'll talk about what makes the GSB interview so distinctive, how candidates can best prepare, what pitfalls to avoid, and how we at mbaMission helps applicants show up as their most authentic selves. If you have a Stanford interview coming up, or simply want to understand why GSB interviews are known for being so personal, so probing, and so powerful, this conversation is one you will not want to miss. Let's get started. So I'll have clients do the Stanford application. 6 or 7 essays, really overwhelming, requires a lot of work. At the end of the day, though, when someone gets a Stanford interview, suddenly panic sets in. So first of all, high stakes, certainly, but what is it that's unique about a Stanford interview rather than some other schools? So let me start off with Christine. Christine, who herself is a Stanford graduate.
Yeah, so interestingly, Stanford has, they take a look at your resume. Not all the interviewers will be looking at your whole application, so that's slightly different from other schools like HBS. Also, it's a behavioral interview. So, focusing on, your past history, obviously your career. Really, I think, maybe having interviewers being alumni as well is a little bit different. It's not always from the AdCom. Julianne, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would say, it's behavioral, but amped up. A lot of schools will ask behavioral interview questions, but you might get, 2 or 3 in the course of it, and the rest of the questions will be, pretty motivational or basic. Whereas Stanford really interrogates the behavioral interview. They call it a structured behavioral interview. So they are really examining multiple angles.
Right. So let's take a step back here. Frequently we'll hear about behavioral interviews. What are they actually? What are they trying to find out? How are they different from just tell me about yourself?
So I would say a behavioral interview is, you'll recognize it when they say, tell me about a time or describe a time when. It's storytelling, right? And so I think what it's trying to get at is probing beneath the accomplishments to the why and how you did something. And so you need to have a plan of attack for that kind of question that's a little bit less off the cuff and a little bit more organized than you would for other answers. Tell me about yourself. You usually have time to guide you, chronology. You start back in college and you move your way forward in your career. Tell me about a time when you had to make a difficult decision. You've got to come up with a way to wrap and explain that situation and to really take them through a story.
Okay, sounds very intimidating. And you really spoke to this need of maybe some sort of structure already there, already built in. So what does that structure even look like?
One common one we recommend is the STAR framework. So tell me about a challenge, for example, you might have had. And so you describe what the challenge could be, with the ST, situation and task. Then you just then describe, in depth about what the action you took was with that challenge. Maybe you missed a sales forecast that you realized there was an error that you had in your forecasting. Go into details of the action that you took and the challenge that it created for the rest of the financial team. And then the R is the result, like, what did you do to mitigate and fix that problem and the challenge that you incurred? But I think the key here is not just having a STAR framework, but really going to depth, a little more depth than just an overview, high level of, okay, I did this, I did that, and then as a result, this happened. I don't think that's enough for this interview question. You want to go into a little more details.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
If you want to be one of our success stories, sign up for a free consultation with a member of our full-time MBA admissions team. Since we've worked with tens of thousands of applicants over the past 2 decades, we can give you our honest opinion on your chances and help you put together your very best application. That is not a sales call, but rather your first session with one of us for free. We can give you a profile evaluation, answer specific questions about the process, review your resume, talk about your school choices, and so much more. Sign up at mbaMission.com/consult. We look forward to working with you.
So the STAR method situation, the kitchen needed to be painted, task, paint the kitchen, action, you bought some paintbrushes and got a friend, and result is you have a great looking kitchen. Julianne, do you think that would be too superficial an answer?
Yes, I think that would probably be the first step of your practice.
Right.
You know, you really need to get deeper than that, as Christine suggested, into the whys and hows. You know, why did you take a particular approach? What were your other options at the time? You know, what were you thinking? Did things work out the way you planned? Were there obstacles? How did you overcome them? And then in terms of results, you know, you don't want to just say, I used X gallons of paint, right? And the kitchen is now yellow. You want to get into kind of like the impact of it or what you learned through that process.
Right. In fact, sometimes people are told to use the STAR L method, where the L being the learning right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think having that growth mindset to figure out, you know, a vulnerability or something that you learned on that, you know, challenge, and actually admit that you were at fault, but then what did you do differently the next time around? I think that's really the key. Or how did it change your mindset when you viewed some, you know, new business opportunity or challenge that you have?
No, that makes sense. And are these the greatest experiences of your life in terms of must they be home runs when compared to somebody else, what they're saying? Or is it something that's far more, like Stanford itself, far more introspective, far more thinking about, okay, how were you changed?
I mean, honestly, I think it's being authentic. It doesn't have to be like, a major home run per se, but something that's true to you, that you believe in, that you can explain in depth. But it doesn't have to be like the biggest deal you've ever had. I think just being yourself is really key.
Yeah. I think it can depend a little bit, though. You know, I think you don't want to go into a Stanford Business School interview only armed with personal stories from your extracurriculars and not talk about work at all. I think that would probably be the wrong way to go. So I do think you have to go into a plan with thinking about, you know, what you really do bring to the table, what you're excited about making an impact on, you know, what are the times that you've really been tested at work. But, you know, agreed, it can't just all be work, and it doesn't all have to be the most amazing thing you've done. You can have some stumbles, but you want to make sure they get to know all of you, including the business you do.
I think a good point that Julianne made is actually going back to your application and seeing, you know, what you think stood out for you, because these interviewers may not have read your whole application. They'll only see your resume. So going back through everything, maybe your brainstorming document you've put together for the school that you've, you know, prepared for. I think going through personal and career accomplishments are both important, I think, to highlight.
No, that makes sense. In going to a Stanford interview and you think about preparation, how many of these sorts of examples do you need to really feel comfortable? Loaded question there. I know there's no one answer, but at the end of the day, I would suspect more than one, less than 10.
I mean, I would do a minimum of 8, but, you know, might be higher, might be 10. I think you don't know how long the interview is going to go. With an alum, it's always a wild card. When you're getting an admissions committee interview, like at Harvard, you know it's a tight 30 minutes. They're not going to vary from that at all. When it's a student on campus, they also have to do a number of slots. They're not really free to ramble on a ton. But anytime you're talking to an alum, all bets are off in terms of length.
That's right. Listen, the reality is that, okay, tell me about yourself, behavioral questions. How much of the interview will be focused on that rather than something else?
It's probably a good number of the questions. Probably the majority of the questions will be behavioral. And then, you know, there'll be time for questions like, maybe why Stanford, you know, later on, or having, if there is time, open questions for the interviewee too. But I think a lot of it will be behavioral.
I think the only, the big difference that I see with my clients who get Stanford interviews is not just, that they're getting only a few behavioral interview questions. It's just that some may get a lot of angles on different types of leadership, and then others will just go more in depth, really long, drawn-out explorations of situations in a McKinsey PEI style of interview where they're really just tunneling deep on maybe two experiences. So those are the two types that I usually hear. But at the end of the day, it's all behavioral.
Right. And listen, we know, again, there's behavioral questions and there's behavioral questions in the sense of, okay, behavioral question, tell me about a time when. At that point, then you respond, and that's sort of the end of it, and never to revisit that issue. But I know that is where Stanford is different in the sense of they will drill down, and they'll drill, and they'll keep on drilling. Yeah. And at some point, they are drilling so deep, you're sort of out of story at that point. What happens then?
Well, I think they're trying to get you off script a little bit and really understand what makes you tick and how you approach situations and what your awareness is of other people that you're working with. I mean, I think a lot of the degree is so introspective and so, about building your own self-awareness and also your awareness of others and how they operate. It's a big part of influence and other skills that you're looking to build with the Stanford MBA, I would think. Would that be your experience, Christine?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think a lot of it is based on, dealing with others, interpersonal skills, because leadership might look like different things to different people. It could be teamwork based. It's not necessarily just having a title per se. So showing different examples of challenges working with different people, being able to collaborate. I think these are all really good skills. Working with diverse stakeholders or different types of people, I think are really great examples as well.
Right. No, that makes sense. There's going to be a lot of tell me about yourself questions as part of a Stanford interview, but that's really not everything. Obviously, there are going to be some other pieces to it. Julianne, what are some of the other pieces?
Well, for examples of questions, I mean, we have a guide on our website, the mbaMission website, interview guides. If you click there, you'll find a Stanford GSB interview guide with some sample questions. But just to give you a taste, a couple of those might be when is a time when you identified an opportunity that others didn't or a threat that others didn't see, and you want to dig into what that whole process was about. Another one might be when were people heading in one direction? The ship was going in one direction and you steered it in a new one. So how you got to turn things around into another point of view or result. And I think these things speak to not having just always top-down formal leadership roles, right? Like it's about how you were a leader within another position on the team. You don't always have to be the one in charge, the one with the big title to make a difference in what's going on in your world.
Christine, what we do at mbaMission is a lot of mock interviewing, particularly in the context of Stanford, but really every. Yeah. So how do you conduct a mock interview? Quite candidly, I've had a number of clients over the years who did not do great at a Stanford interview, and they had really prepped, and at the end of the day, they were almost robotic. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's the point that you said, Julianne. It's they want to get to the person. That's the reason they keep on drilling down. So how do you really navigate the fact that StarL also lends itself to a lot of preparation, but at the same point, you can't do too much preparation, otherwise you start sounding robotic?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, I think it's just don't write it out and memorize it, just really try to think about the main points and what that was like for you. I mean, it depends on the person, right? So sometimes I work with people and they do need that practice.
Yes, right.
And other times I work with people who have got it down that I'm worried if they keep going, they're going to lose all emotion and connection with the interviewer. And, a big part of the interview is this connection with the interviewer, especially at Stanford, because they're making a match when they match you. They're getting somebody that they're hoping that you're going to have this connection with. So you don't want to be so rehearsed that you are just telling planned stories. I get people to practice honestly by talking about their day and things around them in that same way, where they went to dinner and why they did that, or
that's interesting. Yeah,
family experiences. How they interacted with their mother-in-law and why they took that approach. I mean, I think that's a good way to sort of practice the method of the storytelling without getting so canned on your exact story.
Sometimes you'll see the interviewer name in advance. And if that's the case, I definitely obviously recommend researching who that person is. Sometimes if you know that person in advance might have the same industry knowledge or same geographical location as you, that helps bring a bond. And so you can start off with building a connection that way. Then also just reading the body language of your interviewer. So if you're speaking for more than 3 or 4 minutes and suddenly you see the eyes glazing, I think you want to adjust. And, maybe it's time to, close out your answer just because you can tell it's not going the way you want it to be. Maybe the answer is just too long and rambling and not really directed enough. So just, I think reading the cues from your interviewers is key.
Yeah. Listen, what I always think about with the Stanford application overall, it is very much on brand and aligned with Stanford in terms of being an introspective place, thinking about the big picture, not being afraid to be very aspirational. And again, you're going to really be preparing for your interview, I think, when you do those, and it depends on you how you count them, those 4, 5, or 6 essays.
Definitely. I mean, I just went to my GSB Centennial reunion a few weeks ago. Some of my classmates are interviewers for the alumni, and their goal is to help people to get in as many as many as possible who are amazing, and they're there they're really excited to meet people, and I think. One of my classmates focuses on biotech and gets a lot of non-traditional candidates like MD, PhD folks, and she's excited to vouch for these people. I think in general, I would view them as on your side. They're really trying to, engage with you. So use this as an opportunity to put your best foot forward.
100%. I mean, one of the things people get so scared, about these interviews, it's high stakes. They know that it's not everybody's going to get in, right? It's the odds are, they say 1 in 2 or 1 in 3. Not everybody's going to be accepted. But what I'm telling people is, hey, these people are in your general arena a lot of the time, and they are super cool. It's like an opportunity for you to get to know somebody new who's like a leader in this industry. And putting aside, obviously, you want to have a connection with them and get along and have a great interview. Like, this is a great opportunity to meet a mover and shaker in your world. So even if it doesn't work out or you don't convert off of a wait list or whatever, you have just built a new person in your network. And so to treat it as that opportunity. And ironically, most of the time when people are treating it that way, they do get in.
No, that certainly makes sense. Let me ask you then, sort of touching on HBS, how does an interview with HBS compare to an interview with GSB? And which is more important? Which one should you be more concerned about? Which one is really the one that you should really swallow hard when you get that interview?
Oh, they're both really different. I mean, the HBS one I mentioned earlier is this tight 30 minutes. It's with the admissions committee. They've read your entire application. They've maybe done some light Googling. They're coming in with an agenda. It's almost like a case discussion in the room about your application. Your application is the case. Who better to discuss the Harold case than Harold? So, they're going to delve immediately into all kinds of little nooks and crannies, and there's not going to be a lot of prelude or open-ended questions. It'll be like, tell me about your experience on the XYZ deal or something like that. Or why did you decide to go from here to there? It's really deeper into those decision points, for example. Whereas, Stanford, you probably have a little bit more control. They'll ask a more open-ended question because your interviewer's an alum. It's a longer conversation. They haven't they haven't read your essays. So I tell all my clients, read your essays because you can use those for material. All those impact essays are now behavioral interview questions.
Right. Absolutely. Christine, how was your interview? Do you remember it well? Are you still having nightmares about it?
Interviewing never really fazed me when I was applying. I don't know why. I actually don't even recall my interviews at all. All I know is that it was a positive experience, because if it were negative, I'd obviously really remember that. But I think I treated it like a conversation, really.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm going to do another commercial here. A GSB application is quite honestly very hard. It may be the hardest of all the applications. It takes you all sorts of different places, being very introspective to very practical, why Stanford, to impact essays, to tell us about your background. So if you really want to get into it, if you are thinking about a GSB application, then by all means, give us a call, speak to Christine, Harold, Julianne, any one of our 25 or so consultants. We can really talk you through it, at least in a very preliminary way, to help you understand just what goes into a great GSB application. Because the reality is the acceptance rate is just so low. It sort of really is quite amazing to me as far as how low it is. So just to wrap up a little bit here, if you find if a client calls you and say, hey, I got a Stanford interview, what's the first thing they do?
Usually we celebrate, actually. Just getting the interview alone is a big deal. And so I usually give a high five, virtually, and it's great, So I start with the positive there. And then I get into the nitty gritty. Then we have to start preparing for it.
Right. Yeah. And just very quickly here, Stanford is also, I think, a little strange in terms of how it rolls out its interviews.
Yeah, it's and it seems to be creeping earlier and earlier. I mean, it used to always be, Harvard would do it 4 weeks after the deadline, and Stanford would start the night before. And now I find it creeping earlier and earlier. Now this year, is a couple weeks earlier than the the applications have been submitted for 2 or 3 weeks, and already they're starting to trickle out some invitations. But I think that the trickling is the hardest part of the process.
Right. Absolutely. Listen, I once had a great client, who he found out he got a Stanford interview days before he was supposed to receive his final word or acceptance or rejection. And he was waitlisted and then was accepted. Oh, so absolutely. Yeah. It was a happy story there. And what was also interesting, he was a guy who came from the forestry industry. And again, yes, there's some innovative pieces to it as well, but forestry, one does not think innovation when one thinks forestry.
But that's that, rubbing up of different types of people. I mean, you don't want everybody just to be working in VC. Like 100% of the class working in VC would not be very useful at all. You need to have people who are transforming even old industries or bringing in good ideas that nobody pays attention to because they're not the hot topic in 2020, whatever. So
Right. No, absolutely.
So I usually prepare each client with actual interviews from the past. So we have a database of questions from every school from our clients. And so actually I give them these examples so they know what's coming. And also I recommend that if they're a package client, they can go to OnTrack, or even if they have OnTrack on their own. OnTrack is a video module that we can do on-demand learning. And so there's a whole section on interviewing, which is great, maybe 3 hours worth. And there's also then specific school sections where you can record yourself and do a mock interview on your own, which I find very helpful by school. And so these modules are specific for each school, which is nice because every school has different questions. And then after going through the preparation, giving, all this information, then we'll start doing a mock interview, depending on the school. Maybe it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I also make sure that each interviewee has a list of questions ready to tell the interviewer what they might be, depending if they're alumni, students, or faculty. That's actually really important. Some schools don't have time for extra questions at the end, but some do. So you want to be ready for that. Have at least 3, answers or questions ready for the interviewer. And then after the mock interview is done, then I'll give feedback real time afterwards. I record the mock interview so they can actually see it afterwards. After I give feedback, maybe we'll do another mock interview, depending how they feel, if they want more.
What are some of your favorite mock interview questions for Stanford?
For me, because I graduated from Stanford, I actually love the question, why Stanford? And the reason is because sometimes I feel like if you haven't done enough homework, it really shines through. And I think if you can replace and substitute that school name with any other school name with your answer, you haven't done enough yet to prepare. So, in this situation, I say at least visit or do some admissions events, do a few one-on-one conversations with alumni, students, or faculty. go beyond what's expected, basically. I think that you can tell when someone's really figured out the fit and the reason why they want to go to a certain
Right,
school.
and really for every school.
Yeah.
Really for every school. It's like you don't have to go to a particular school to learn accounting, for example. And most schools are going to have some sort of entrepreneurial curriculum. So you always think to yourself, okay, how is the Stanford Innovation curriculum going to be different from some other school? Or what is Stanford doing that other schools are actually not doing? What are sort of those margin or edge courses or focuses that Stanford has? And by all means, if you're applying to Stanford, and I say this as a non-Stanford graduate who nevertheless does a lot of Stanford mock interviews, don't tell me about the touchy-feely class. At the end of the day, if I ask the mock question, hey, why Stanford? 90% of the people say touchy-feely class. And at this point, I think it speaks to the fact you didn't quite do your homework. You really have to push down much deeper than that.
I think it's just not naming a class that you're just going to sit in, like connect it to why you need that introspection for your goals. What are you missing? What are you trying to accomplish or do that's going to help? So it's not just the analogy I always use is a swimming pool. Don't just describe Stanford's beautiful swimming pool. It might be the perfect temperature or whatever, but how are you going to use it? What are you going to do with that? Are you going to test your swimsuit designs for your new line of eco-friendly swimwear?
Right.
What are you going to do with it? So if you do bring it up, I agree, we can get tired of hearing the same kinds of answers, and so can they. But if you're telling me really thoughtfully how you're going to use it, then that can win me over.
I think especially we know these interviewers don't read your essays. So go back to your essay number 2 that you'd written for the application and review what you said, why Stanford, and how will Stanford achieve your goals, short-term, long-term. And I think once you go back to that, this answer becomes very easy to answer.
Well, thank you very much, Julianne. Thank you very much, Christine, telling us about not just interviewing at Stanford, but really how to approach Stanford, what the application looks like. And by all means, if you want to spend more time with Christine, Julianne, me, or one of our, like I said before, 20 or so different consultants, give us a call, spend 30 minutes on the phone with us, and we'd love to help you. We'd love to talk to you.
Exciting news! You can now access On Track by mbaMission for free. Take our 2-minute onboarding questionnaire to personalize your learning path. Choose the free plan, and you'll have unlimited access to our complete modules on MBA application timelines, standardized testing, your professional background, community leadership, school selection, and more. You'll also get access to select lessons from our brainstorming, personal statement, essay, resume, and recommendation modules. It's a great introduction to the On Track platform and will help you jumpstart the MBA application process. Get started today at ontrack.mbamission.com.